Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the 13th of September 2025. I did do a YouTube short explaining why today's video was late. Sorry, both my twins are now playing football. It used to only be one of them. The other one's taken football back up after a 5-year hiatus. So he started in his new team, which is actually his very, very old team that I used to manage until I got multiple sclerosis. So they know him and they know all the challenges he might have. He scored the first goal in a 7-1 win in D League, and my other twin plays for an A League team, and they could win the league this year. And they won 3-1. He scored a goal as well. So both my twins scored, and it was a good day out. I got absolutely soaking. It was honking it down at one point. So I'm back now in the driving seat for some facts and figures and information on what has taken place over the last 24 hours concerning the war in Ukraine. We start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them linked in the description below. 950 personnel lost, which is getting back up in the 900s. 4 tanks, 1 single troop carrying AFV, 39 artillery systems, 1 multiple launch rocket system, so 39 artillery systems is a pretty high number there. 109 vehicles and fuel tanks, that's back over 100. And I think that suggests the Russians are losing some fairly significant numbers of people, but not potentially not huge amounts of equipment, although there are some vehicles and fuel tanks there. So what could explain that? Well, let's look at a couple of areas. We're going to very quickly talk about what's going on in this Pokrovsk area, though let it be known that one, it's pretty chaotic there. Both sides seem to accept that. This might be painting things in a very positive light for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are suffering in other places on the front line, particularly just south of here in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So going into there, Ukrainians are losing some ground there quite badly. But anyway, around Pokrovsk, the enemy is trapped, says this source cloud. On this sector of the front, Ukrainian assault troops are conducting one of the most successful operations in recent months, some say actually in the whole war. The enemy is attempting to advance, but the Ukrainians are systematically grinding down enemy forces, cutting supply routes and subjecting them to a devastating crossfire. In just 2 weeks, Ukrainian forces have achieved what once seemed impossible, though through the coordinated efforts of the 33rd and 425th Assault Regiments, in cooperation with the 1st Assault Regiment, the 24th and 25th Assault Battalions, as well as the 79th and 82nd Air Assault Brigades, the enemy has found itself in operational and, in some areas, tactical encirclement. 3 major pockets are now clearly forming on the map. Russia has deployed some of its most capable units to the area, including special forces, in an effort to prevent the encirclement from closing, yet even elite formations have failed to halt the advance of Ukrainian assault troops. The fighting is intense, with ongoing engagements. An increasing number of Russian troops, realizing the inevitable, are surrendering. Ukrainian fighters note that the situation is beginning to resemble the Battle of Kursk. The enemy is laying down arms en masse, unable to withstand the pressure. Yesterday, Commander-in-Chief Su-30 of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Su-30, made another working trip in this direction to discuss the specifics of the operational situation and hear proposals from local officers and options for further active measures aimed at defeating the enemy group. The work is progressing. Russians will gain nothing except coffins, is that claim. So certainly an area of a lot of dynamic activity. The trap is closed, says this particular source. What's unfolding now in the sector is nothing short of historic. Ukrainian assault units have launched one of the most successful operations, blah, blah, blah. So that's exactly the same statement there. So, makes you worry if you've got exactly the same wording on several sources. Makes you look like it's a concerted attempt to kind of control the narrative, but it is looking like Pokrovsk is not going particularly well for the Russians, although they did get into the city of Pokrovsk, but that may have they may have been cleared out of the southern areas of the city. Now, there have been these claims that Filia is one place in Dnipropetrovsk where the Ukrainians have been pushed out of. Now, Russian propaganda at work again here, says no reports. In Filia in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, Russians shelled with MLRS and FPVs, then sent a swimmer to plant a flag on one house. Minutes later, Ukrainian troops cleared the area, tore it down, and raised the Ukrainian flag. So actually, pretty incredible footage there coming from this video, where you have a swimmer actually caught on camera with a flag trying to do essentially some clandestine PR and go and get across to a house and plant a flag there. But yeah, they may have taken a village back, the Ukrainians there, but that is certainly an area to keep an eye on. Now, another area where the Russians are actually succeeding possibly a little more than they were previously, because the Ukrainians have pushed back northwest of Kupiansk, is Kupiansk. So Tim White says Russia pulled up their pipe stunt again for at least the third time, having advanced through underground pipelines previously in Avdiivka. So if you remember, southeast of Avdiivka, they got in some pipes and came up behind the Ukrainians, and actually this was a bit of a disaster for the Ukrainians, and it ended up seeming to precipitate a bit of serious gains in that area of the Avdiivka front. That was bad. It happened in Sudzha as well in Kursk, although I think that was more of a disaster where they lost a lot of troops, and a lot of troops got ill afterwards due to the pipe's gases, and they had lung issues for some time after it. And they cut a bit of pipe, and I don't think it was actually from the Sudzha area, but they mocked it up somewhere, and it's become like this cult place where people go and pray and all sorts of really weird. So anyway, you had Avdiivka and then Sudzha, and now you've got Kupiansk, where they're caught on camera repeating the same trick there, and they were using trolleys and even scooters there to then burst out of the pipe. And indeed, here we have some footage coming from inside the pipe. It's a very clean pipe, actually. A video has appeared online allegedly showing Russian troops sneaking through a gas pipeline to enter the city of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region. So that has happened and may have led to some problems in the north, and there are claims that the Russians are now in the northern suburbs of Kupiansk where they previously weren't. So definitely a concern there for the Ukrainians. Now, an Oryx Yakobuyanovsky loss list here. We have Russians losing 38 since the last update, the Ukrainians losing 19, so 50% of what the Russians are losing, so that's good for the Ukrainians. For them, a couple of tanks, some mobility vehicles, Striker, Max Pro, M113, Kozak, Humvee, so 3 Humvees actually, and then you're down to some artillery, including a Bogdana destroyed and a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system destroyed. So the Ukrainians losing a couple of key bits of artillery, but having said that, Bogdana are going to soon become the bog standard. That's a 3.0 variant. We're now up to the 4.0 for Bogdana. Also included here is a Su-27. We're going to see the footage, or not the footage, the imagery of that fighter. That was one that came down in the Donetsk region, I think. And we don't know exactly what happened, but the Ukrainians did lose a pilot the other day. And then the rest are, not too serious bits of logistical equipment. When it comes to the Russian losses, we've got more tanks. In fact, we have 2, 4, 6, 10 tanks actually. 4 and so 10 tanks, a lot more there. Some mobility vehicles in terms of APCs, a few infantry fighting vehicles, 3 BMP-3, 2 of those destroyed. I said that you'll see more and more BMP-3s out of, if you're going to see any BMPs at the moment, it's more likely to be the BMP-3 because that's what they make from brand new. They're going to struggle to refurbish BMP-1s and 2s because they're only left with the seriously worst of the worst in those deep storage. And it's probably the case that it's going to cost more money and take more time to refurbish the husk of a BMP-1 that's the worst of the worst that's left, rather than make something from new. But like if you destroy a Lego model, actually it takes longer to look for the individual pieces and find those pieces that you're missing and put them back to build the model back to what it was. It's often quicker to build the model from scratch. With all the pieces just taken apart, and it's kind of like that. I just think the Russians are going to be making. You're you're going to be seeing more BMP-3s, essentially. You've got some other equipment on there as well, but the Russians are losing more equipment, but that Su-27 for the Ukrainians is going to hurt. Now, talking about jets, the Russians have lost a jet by all accounts at around 4 a.m. in the morning, yesterday. Yeah, was that 2 nights ago? And then that's 8. So that was 2 nights ago now. At the Kupiansk military airfield in the Moscow region, a Russian Su-30 SM or Su-35 fighter crashed during landing, according to Exile Nova. The pilot of the plane was a colonel of the Russian aerospace force. The pilot is in serious condition, so he is recovering in hospital, but there was a crash with a Russian, either Su-30 or Su-35. That's going to hurt the Russians. And the Ukrainian Su-27 taken down near Dobrapilya, or it came down. Here it says the claim is it was shot down. I presume it was, but I'm not sure we've got any confirmation of exactly what happened to this plane. The pilot sadly died, but that came down near Dobrapilya. So both forces losing a plane, and potentially both forces losing a pilot. The Russians, if he's in serious condition, I don't think he's going to be flying anytime soon. Now, then we hear about this. So, Special Kherson Cat said, according to the Dossier Shpiona Telegram source, I think it is, over the past day, there have been reports of the destruction of 2 Pantsir S1 systems. So these are pretty decent short to medium range air defense systems that the Russians use. The statement of this source is usually confirmed later. The first case occurred in the city of Luhansk around 2 in the morning by a Ram-2X drone. This is a drone that we have seen be used more and more in those medium ranges, rather like the Lancets. Ram-2X seems to be causing some real havoc with logistics decently behind enemy lines. Now, the second attack took place in the village of Snizhne in the Donetsk region. A Pantsir S1 was also destroyed there. The type of drone, though, that took it out was unknown, or is unknown. Good news there. 2 Pantsir S1s. No, of course, no visual confirmation of that, so take it with a pinch of salt, but usually a reliable source saying that. We also hear that Russia is reportedly considering repurchasing the S-400 systems, air defense systems that it sold to Turkey back in 2019, but which Ankara is not actively using and selling them to another country. In my opinion, says Yakub Yanovsky from Oryx, since Russia owes 2 S-400 batteries to India, that might fit this proposal. So it could be that Russia is buying those back to then give them to India, because India are pressuring them to get S-400 systems. Or it's a case of getting them from Turkey to put in their own country or in the occupied territories. But of course, they still need to find 2 more to give to India. Hopefully they're not buying them in order to get them back to their own country and use them, because that would obviously have an effect on Ukraine there. Now, FPV drone barely manages to hit a Russian Molniya. So we're going to rewind to the beginning here. You've got a Russian fixed-wing Molniya drone that is being followed by an FPV drone, a Ukrainian one, but it doesn't quite hit it. It doesn't take it down. But what happens, though, is the FPV drone that's trying to take this Molniya down ends up just following it, and you see what it's actually aiming for. What's it aiming for? A civilian car. In the end, it captures a war crime by Putin's soldiers, a strike on a civilian vehicle, and a deliberate killing of civilians in the Kramatorsk area of Donetsk region. Kramatorsk is getting absolutely shellacked. So is Konstantinivka. Some of these places near the front line, up in that area around Bakhmut, they're really suffering, the Ukrainians. These cities there are getting absolutely blitzed. Artillery and guided glide bombs, etc., etc. Now, multiple Russian Telegram channels are reporting that containers equipped with surveillance cameras are being placed by the Ukrainian heavy drones where they can monitor Russian positions. I haven't really thought about this, but it's bleeding obvious. You know, what a good way of getting intel. Just get one of your Baba Yagas to go and drop a box like that records with a camera what's going on behind enemy lines, and have that relay its message all the way back to base. They're monitoring Russian positions. A Starlink antenna provides communications. Wowzers. yeah, not much more to say about that other than seems to be a pretty good idea. Okay, another Russia on fire instance. A massive fire broke out this morning at a plywood plant in Usoloye, Sibirskoye, Irkutsk region in Russia. The blaze has spread across 4,000 square meters, with 30 emergency crews still battling the flames. This is another Russia on fire issue. Factory burned down in Irkutsk region, claimed to be plywood manufacturer, but with nationwide military mobilization of industries, it's difficult to know for sure whether it's just plywood, but that is seriously on fire. And most days at the moment, I am reporting some serious fires taking place in Russia. It must be hurting. Now, on to distance munitions. We're going to start with the normal infographic. 165 drones and missiles sent into Ukraine. 137 of those were taken down. So we had 164 drones and one single missile. 137 drones were stopped. That's 84% interception rate. The remaining 27 hit 9 locations. Still an awful lot of drones to go through and hit whatever location they are, and indeed a missile too. So there will be some fairly heavy damage in places before we get to see what was hit. This is coming from Zelensky. For 800 Russian Shaheds, Ukraine needs 1,600 interceptor drones. So he's claiming that the ratio needed to take down these Russian Shaheds is a ratio 2-to-1. Interceptor drones to the drone they're hoping to take down. So they're not always successful. And they're going to need just a huge number of them, especially if the Russians are throwing in an 800 drone wave into Ukraine, then you're going to have to need 1,600 drones to take them, interceptor drones to take them out. Of course, you still got all the other ways of intercepting them: electronic warfare, helicopters taking them down, jets taking them down, mobile defense teams, and missile placements. So, yeah. Now, the head of the German Parliament's Defense Committee, Thomas Roverkamp, said that the best way to combat drones during the war is to destroy their production facilities, amen brother, and launchers on Russian territory, and NATO partners should provide Ukraine with the necessary capabilities for this. Now that the Shaheds were sent into Poland, you're getting a lot of Western voices coming out and saying, yeah, we need to be providing Ukraine with the ability to blow up Yelabuga once and for all. And that's music to my ears. Now, no report says Ukraine's electronic warfare systems have become more effective against Russian Kinzhal missiles. So these are hypersonic missiles, NATO designation Dagger, making their hits less frequent. Suspilna reports, citing General Staff sources, Russia has already lost at least $1.5 billion countering electronic warfare, forced to equip bombs and Shaheds with costly CRPA antennas worth about $10,000 to $17,000 each. Now, dollars. This indicates that the Russians are spending a lot of money fighting electronic warfare countermeasures against their missiles. That's really good. As long as everything costs them a lot of money, I'll be happy. But it's good. Also, good news to hear that the Kinzhal is not being quite as effective as they would hope. Now, there are some pretty horrific images coming out of bombs and missiles and Shaheds doing their thing in several places. Here is Kharkiv region, attacked overnight with area bombs, FPV drones and regular drones falling consistently throughout the night. In Balka village near Kupiansk, a woman was injured in a strike on a house which caught fire, while in Kaliniove, a culture centre, apartment blocks and a hospital were damaged. So here is all the damage. Well, not all of it. Here's some of the damage that can be witnessed in Kharkiv, one presumes, region. And Sumy remains one of the most heavily attacked areas. The regional council says 3 people have been killed and 5 more injured since yesterday morning. The air raid in the region lasted 23 hours and 25 minutes. Wow, just consistently under threat. And some more striking imagery coming out from the general staff there. That's that last one. Okay, moving on. Nov Reports states that Russian mill bloggers claim Ukraine is actively using new jet-powered drones resembling cruise missiles. Recent strikes in Donetsk, Makhivka, and over the Black Sea combined with regular drones, ADM-160 MALD decoys, and jet drones like the Peklo. So amongst all this other myriad of equipment that the Ukrainians are using in any one given set of attacks, they are throwing in some new jet-powered drones, and we saw some imagery of a drone that was used at the Topaz facility yesterday. I showed you that image of a drone that looked to be an unknown Ukrainian drone. So definitely trying things out at the moment. Now, as to what strikes genuinely took place last night from the Ukrainians, here is some video, Tim White showing recently that Ukraine has switched to alternative fuel targets or oil targets in Russia, rather than just hitting refineries such as depots, pipelines and pumping stations. So we've seen Druzhba pumping station get hit regularly. There's one, a Transneft one, I think somewhere up north that was hit yesterday that I reported on. Yeah, so they're hitting pumping stations, sometimes even gas stations with large fuel reserves, as we saw. I think, was it Bryansk or one of those, Bryansk, Kursk or Belgorod. But today, in broad daylight, the Ukrainians struck around 1,600 kilometers from the border, although other people say it's slightly less than that, 1,350. But anyway, a long way from Ukraine. So this is a moment that Ukraine's drone left a calling card at the Nova Ufa refinery in Ufa. When Russia's refineries this far away start getting hit, there are big problems for Russia. Most problems at the pump and with inflation soon after for the public. So hopefully some decent damage done to Nova Ufa. Just now, the refinery with a capacity of 7.5 million tons per year was attacked by drones in Ufa, Russia. Nova Ufa refinery is located, this one says, 1,350 kilometers from Ukraine. This is a drone that targeted the oil refinery in Ufa that looks like one of these Foxbat training aircraft or similar that has been co-opted now to become a drone, and that's what they have succeeded in developing, the Ukrainians there. Indeed, a beautiful view of Ufa, the refinery here. Beautiful because, this is what Max25 says, it has a pretty big fire going on in the middle. This does seem to be only one hit that I'm definitely aware of on Ufa Nova. But, yeah, I don't know. Our drones in the Ukrainian, in UFA, anyway, drones. Oh, Ufa. It sounded like that was actually an acronym. So drones going off in Ufa, at least one. Don't know the exact details there, but hopefully some lasting damage done to the infrastructure there. So more breaking news in Russia, says Tim White. Moscow says a Ukraine drone attacked the Smolensk nuclear power 2 nights ago. But two things to note below in state reports. One, why do they only announce it after 2 p.m.? Two, once news agencies says, news agency says the drone was suppressed. So Russia actually sent it into the plant. So it seems a little bit dodgy that, that claim that the Russians are making. Okay, then we go on to some strikes from last night that weren't just Ufa. SBU drones struck Russia's key. Oh no, actually, sorry, this is from 2 nights ago, concerning Primorsk in the Leningrad region, where there is port infrastructure that Ukraine has successfully struck, including potentially a ship. So the port of Primorsk was hit as a key export hub. The Ukrainians set fire to a vessel and a pumping station, halting crude shipments. Primorsk handles around 60 million tons of oil annually, bringing Russia $15 billion. Additional strikes targeted pumping stations feeding the Ust-Luga terminal. Ukrainian drones also struck Russia's Leningrad region overnight, with an attack continuing into the morning It's still unclear what was hit, and damage assessment is ongoing, was what we previously heard from yesterday. So that was a day ago. That's one I showed you, the image I showed you yesterday, and that supposedly shows the ship that had been hit. That's caused some oil spillage around that area too. So this is a bit more detail. So in addition to Primorsk, says Special Kherson Cat, it said that Ukraine Security Services, the SBU, struck several Russian oil pumping stations, the MPS-3, MPS Antrypol, and the MPS-7. These facilities are part of the main pipeline system that supplies crude oil to the Ust-Luga port. So I don't know too much about these images, but you can make of these what you will. Here we have satellite imagery of one of the pumping stations that may well have been hit. And there you go. Okay. So what else? Yeah. That's that from that source. Now, fire on the territory of the Russian Primorsk seaport and drone debris in the sea around it. The hits on a vessel and oil pumping station were confirmed by the Russian governor for the Leningrad region as well. So, yeah, not looking good there for Russia's continued reliance on hydrocarbons and their transportation and exports. Now, European leaders have been speaking the truth to Trump with regard to Poland and the airstrikes, or at least the Russian drones flying into Polish airspace. Either, I don't know, 19, 23, various numbers are being touted. Now, Trump came out, as I reported yesterday, and said, hey, it could have been a mistake. So the first thing he said about the incursion into Polish airspace was it could have been a mistake. So intuitively looking to defend Russia from criticism. Then I reported that Radoslaw Sikorski, the foreign minister, came out and said flatly it was not a mistake. And now we've got the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, saying we would also wish that the drone attack on Poland was a mistake, but it wasn't. And we know it. So it's really interesting that two of the top politicians in Denmark have put Trump in his place over a misguided statement. Now, Russian Z bloggers openly say themselves that there was no mistake and the Russian drones deliberately entered Poland during the attack on Ukraine. Quote, first of all, the drones that flew into Poland were not ordinary Gerber drones. As noted earlier, some of them were equipped with additional fuel tanks, something that has never been seen on any Ukrainian Gerber drone. Secondly, the drones carried, albeit relatively simple, CRP antennas to protect against electronic warfare. In other words, drones specifically designed for Poland entered its territory with a very clear task: to fly as far as possible over Polish airspace. Still, it's possible they stayed there accidentally. Such things happen. The most important thing is that everyone witnessed NATO's complete inability to cope even with the simplest aerial threats. To intercept flying plywood with just a few $1,000s, worth just a few $1,000s, NATO used AEWs and F-35As with missiles worth millions, yet they only managed to shoot down 3 drones. It's not hard to imagine what would have happened if we had launched, say, 300 to 400 Garand drones at Zhezhou. There would be nothing left of it. Let us remind you, the drones that flew into Poland were unarmed Gerber drones. NATO already understands this and has begun taking its first, albeit not very useful, steps, says this Russian source. The Netherlands has decided to deploy 2 Patriots and NASAM systems in eastern Poland. From this follows another point: Western air defense systems that could have been transferred to Ukraine will now be kept for such situations, something Zelensky has already complained about. Another important detail is that there was no retaliatory response from NATO. They limited themselves to consultations and condemnations. This means that next time we could quite accidentally send a dozen Garand drones on holiday to Zhezhou. So the Russians really talking about how this is all part of their plan. No mistake there. And yet you've got Trump still saying, well, it could have been a mistake. Now, NATO has, in response to that, launched what they call Eastern Sentry. It's a mission that should mitigate against Russian drones going into European and NATO airspace. NATO has launched its Eastern Sentry mission with French aircraft arriving in Poland after Russian drones violated Polish airspace, according to Poland's general staff. So That's good news there. And now we're going to go on to other bits and pieces to finish off the video for today. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Su-30 has visited, as mentioned, the front lines in Pokrovsk and Dobropilya. At a command post, he met with corps commanders to assess the situation and discuss further actions, with special forces on neutralizing Russian Marines redeployed to press the offensive near Dobropilya. So obviously some consternation about the Russians being able to bring in some half-decent troops to the area from other sectors where, you know, they were operating. But like I've said to you before, the Russian VDV, and those are paratroopers and Naval Infantry Brigade, Marines, they are no longer the crack troops they were, at least not in the main. They will have reconstituted so many times, like the 155th, it keeps getting its nose broken, goes to these different theatres. And, you know, for example, down by Vuhledar, then up to Sumy, now down to try and save those encircled troops in the Pokrovsk area. And they just keep getting absolutely decimated. And then they have to reconstitute. But you're bringing in people, normally, like I've said to you many times, these VDV and NIB elite units would take the cream of the regular units. Say, right, here's your best 5 people. We'll take them. We'll take your best 5 people from over there. You bring all the already excellent, proven fighters, and you bring them into the Marines or airborne, and they become your crack units. Now they're just replacing their losses because they're so huge, the losses, and it's kind of wartime. They are just mobilizing, I think, straight into the NIB and VDV, and therefore that reconstitution just fundamentally weakens the crack unit. And so they're not what they used to be, that's for sure. Okay, Ukrainian Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal visited a training ground in the UK where Ukrainian servicemen were undergoing intensive training under the guidance of foreign instructors. More than 60,000 Ukrainian servicemen have passed through the Interflex program in the UK. So it's great to have the Ukrainian Prime Minister visit the UK training ground, sign some flags, and do some Shmyhal stuff. Now, on to a bit of Russian economic woes. So, Russian state media has broken the silence on a fuel crisis hitting more than now 10 regions. Officials blame vacation season. But the Institute for the Study of War, the American military think tank, says Ukraine's deep strikes on fuel processing facilities are working. So, they, as we know, last night they hit Ufa and a refinery there that I don't know that's been hit before. I'm not sure. But they're hitting a whole range of refineries and depots, but also gas pumping and transportation infrastructure is being taken out as well. As well as that, you are seeing the Ukrainians target what looks like I don't know if they're commercial or whether they're used by the Russian armed forces or both, but you're starting to see petrol, holding tanks at commercial stations get hit. So you have your petrol station, and then kind of nearby you've got some of these like horizontally laid tanks, loads of them in these arrays, and they've been hitting a number of those recently, such as in Bryansk the other day. Now, Russia's gasoline exports from seaports collapsed to zero in August after Moscow's full export ban. So just 1.28 million tons shipped in January to August versus 4.3 million a year earlier, and that was a 70% drop. Usual buyers like Libya and Brazil are cut off, while Russia faces fuel shortages from Siberia to occupied Crimea. Moscow may still push out fuel oil, but the domestic crunch shows its energy system is breaking under sanctions pressure and drone strikes. So it's not looking good for the Russian petrol industry there. They are suffering big time. Zero exports, which you'd expect given there's an export ban, but nonetheless, that carries with it a huge opportunity cost to the budget. Tim White talks about Prince Harry. So after leaving Ukraine yesterday evening, Prince Harry has allowed these photos to be released. Duke of Sussex visited the Alley of Fallen Heroes in Kiev. He paid respects and thanks to Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine provides one of the largest teams for the Invictus Games. So the Invictus Games is Prince Harry's thing, where he created this Olympics for people who have had bad injuries, disabled people from the armed forces. around the world, and different nations compete against each other in the sporting arena. That's Harry's thing, and he's already been advocating very strongly for the Ukrainians. They feature very strongly in the Invictus Games. So he was out in Kiev yesterday, and then visited for all the team who came with me, or I came with them to Lviv and then Kiev this time round. And when I went previously, we visited here several times. Actually, it is a focal point, and you'll get an awful lot of foreign leaders that will come to see that. It's right in the center of Kiev, and there's a board going down the side as well with all names of people and photos and whatnot, and it's a very evocative place to go. So no surprise seeing Prince Harry there. Now another British leader, or not a leader anymore, a dignitary, I guess, is visiting Ukraine at the moment. So this is Boris Johnson, who's in Odessa right now with Lord Ashcroft and I don't know who else. The former Prime Minister joined in one of Ukraine's newest traditions, the Piano Dawn in Odessa. Mornings are greeted on Langeron Beach with a pianist, Ihor Yanchuk, tinkling the ivories. Now, your man Boris Johnson is very popular still in Ukraine. As Tim White said before that, I'll start in Odessa because that's where this familiar face has turned up. He was planning to return to Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, but couldn't make it. Now Boris is back, loved by nearly all Ukrainians. His early arrival with Lord Ashcroft meant he avoids the crowds. That looks like Honcharenko there. Interesting person to be hanging out with, because he's slightly critical from within Ukraine. Now, just to set the record straight, Tim White does this, said a correct addition of balance to the positive Boris Johnson stories. It's worth understanding that Boris Johnson has a complex relationship with Russia and Ukraine. Indeed, at the beginning of the war, and I was reporting on this, people were wondering which way UK would go, because the Conservative Party, who were in charge at the time, have a very close relationship with some rather nefarious Russian entities and people, and there has been a lot of Russian money laundered through London, to the point where London is often called Londongrad because of its Russian connections, and you had peerages given out to Russian oligarchs, and so people were thinking, Boris Johnson could end up not really helping Ukraine that much. He ended up going the other way, and we're like, phew. And he was really strong on Ukraine, although some people are claiming that he was particularly strong on Ukraine because domestically he was tanking in the polls, and he was in all sorts of trouble through post-COVID rule breaking or COVID rule breaking and all sorts of scandals. So it's an interesting one, and I wonder what history would tell us, because as this source says, a reminder that Johnson ennobled the son of a KGB agent, so gave him a peerage, suppressed the Russia report on electoral interference, and this is true. We still have not seen, I don't think, the report that was generated on Russian interference in UK elections. It didn't come out because it was suppressed by Boris Johnson, only, you think, because it implicated the Conservative Party in Russian interference, rather like what happened in the US in 2016. He sold himself to give tennis lessons to a Russian oligarch's wife, and gave a Russian IT company £2.6 million to renovate the number 10 media room, renovated by Russians. Interesting. Why would you give that to a Russian IT company? What the hell is going on there? I've not heard that one. He went to Ukraine after each new scandal. Is the claim there, pinch of salt and all that, but just to give you the balance on Boris Johnson. Now, the US imposes sanctions on companies from 10 countries for their supplies of goods to Russia, according to US Treasury Department. Interesting is the US turning a corner with regard to sanctions. The US is imposing sanctions on companies from Russia, China, Turkey, the UAE, India, Iran, Singapore, Taiwan, and other countries. They supplied products in the interest of the Russian military-industrial complex and exported American goods to Russia without permits. The sanctions will come into force on September 16th. Yes, these are the first new sanctions directly in the context of this war that we have seen from the Trump administration. I think he put some sanctions on that were actually like connected to other things, but these I think are the most overt sanctions on entities connected to the war in Ukraine. However, so I was thinking, this morning, it's like, this is really good news. The US could be turning a corner. That they might be working with the EU in terms of working on further sanctions. Then we hear this. So Trump sets impossible demands for NATO. So we're going to read this in a second. Trump has stated something else on Truth Social. He sets impossible demands for NATO as conditions for sanctions on Russia. NATO allies aren't going to put 100% tariffs on China. It just won't happen. This amounts to a statement that he does not intend to follow through on any of his threats. So Trump said this, a letter sent by President Donald Trump to all NATO nations and the world, in all caps. Quote, I am ready to do major sanctions on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed and started to do the same thing. So it's like, I'm not going to lead this. NATO does it, and NATO has to do it first. And when all NATO nations stop buying oil from Russia, knowing full well that Slovakia and Hungary are going to struggle to do that, Turkey possibly as well. As you know, NATO's commitment to win has been far less than 100%, and the purchase of Russian oil by some has been shocking. It greatly weakens your negotiating position and bargaining power over Russia. Anyway, I'm ready to go when you are. Just say when. I believe that this, plus NATO as a group placing 50% to 100% tariffs on China to be fully withdrawn after the war with Russia and Ukraine is ended, will also be of great help in ending this deadly but ridiculous war. China has a strong control and even grip over Russia, and these powerful tariffs will break that grip. This is not Trump's war. It would never have started if I was president. Yawn. It is Biden's and Zelensky's war. So now he's blaming Zelensky again. So in the middle of this like ridiculous claim that all NATO nations need to sanction China at 100%, 50 to 100%, and then once all NATO nations do that, then the US will start sanctioning Russia. And so he said that ridiculous, set up that ridiculous conditional, and then he says it's Zelensky's war again. Like, freaking hell, who is writing this? Some people are claiming that in the post Charlie Kirk assassination, that Stephen Miller is writing everything that you hear written like this. And I've been long wondering who writes this stuff, because whoever it is tries their hardest not to help Ukraine and tries their hardest to blame Zelensky. Sometimes I think Trump gets a lot of a hard time because of things he said in public, but I'm not sure he knows what he said. I just think he's an absolute puppet. And I'm fairly sure that's what's happened here. So, but it's Biden and Zelensky's war. Now, of course, you know, he would also say this as well. We've heard him say this too. But you know, we're hearing all these other things where it looks like the US is warming to sanctions on Russia and are starting to work more closely, and we're going to come to something else that we're hearing too. And then you hear this and you're thinking, oh my God, we're back to where we were previously. Anyway, I am only here to help stop it and save thousands of Russian and Ukrainian lives. 7,118 lives lost last week alone. Crazy. I don't know how he knows that, because there's no knowledge of Ukrainian lives. Anyway, if NATO does as I say, the war will end quickly and all of those lives will be saved. If not, you are just wasting my time and the time, energy and money of the United States. Who's he blaming? If NATO does as I say. So he's now blaming NATO. So he's saying, if NATO doesn't do this, you are wasting my time. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. Honestly, what an absolute dingbat. So last night, Tim White says, a row of new sanctions, US sanctions on Russian supporters. So having said that, they have put some sanctions in place. He said, my story has now been confirmed. China's Academy of Sciences National Time Service Center is the biggest name on the list, while firms in India and Turkey have also been targeted. So there are full details of what have or who has been sanctioned. But in general, what Trump has said on that True Social post is absolutely terrible for Ukraine. NATO will never do that. And by NATO, I mean all of the NATO countries are never going to do that. It just won't happen. And then he says he's basically set up the situation to blame NATO if Ukraine do not prevail. If Russia prevails and they don't get sanctioned, it's NATO's fault. It's not the US's fault. It's not Donald Trump's fault for not being hard on Russia, even though he said 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 50 days, 10 to 12 days, 2 weeks. Even though he said that, after the 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks, which was ended 2 weeks ago, he then says, oh, it's up to NATO to do it. Honestly, bad. And then Axios comes out with this. Trump recently doubts his ability to influence Putin to end the war. So if that's true, if Axios has come out with a newspaper article that suggests that Trump is accepting that he's not able to influence Putin, while at the same time saying surely understanding that the only way you influence Putin is by whacking sanctions on from the US unilaterally and then asking NATO and other nations to follow suit, he's now saying NATO has to do that. So he's got the opportunity to influence Putin to end the war in Ukraine, but he doesn't take it and then goes, well, I doubt my ability to influence Putin. No, you've got the ability to influence Putin. You just need to fricking do it, but you've now demanded that NATO do it instead of you, and you'll follow suit if NATO do it, but knowing that NATO are never going to be able to do that. Just insane. It's just insane. Last thing I'm going to leave you on is good news, and that's that Ramzan Kadyrov, the murderous war criminal Chechen warlord, is seriously ill. Now, I saw a video of him, I almost showed you about 2 weeks ago. Did he go to an award ceremony or something? He could barely walk, essentially. It's like, you don't have long left in the world. So Ramzan Kadyrov's health has sharply deteriorated. He reportedly uses a urine bag and has almost stopped running Chechnya. Novaya Gazeta Europe writes, so this is coming from Russian sources citing an FSB source. 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic necrosis. Since then, he ignored doctor's orders. In fact, he killed one of his doctors, didn't he? And resorted to self-treatment, which repeatedly led to health crises. In February, doctors installed a nephrostomy, a drainage system to remove urine from the kidneys. While it allows a person to live for years, it requires a gentle lifestyle. Heavy exertion is forbidden, and loose clothing is recommended. Exactly how Kadyrov now appears during his rare public outings. In August, Chechen TV showed him moving slowly and with difficulty while inspecting construction sites and schools. In reality, Kadyrov had already stepped back from daily governance. Routine duties had been delegated to his possible successor, Magomed Daudov. Throughout August, the Chechen leader held only one meeting and one session in his office. Anyway, thank you very much for your viewership. Really appreciate that. That's the end of the video. Just to remind you that we are running a campaign for ATP Geopolitics for the Autumn Harvest Car for Ukraine campaign. We are ticking up through the 4,000s at the moment. I really appreciate those who have supported. I'll read out your names very quickly, those who have done so in the last couple of days. That would be Andras Vaheli, Martin Gilmovich, and Royal Knoll, Julian Rossiter, of course, Total Ledge, Mike Hawes, Michael Lamming, Adrian Edward Jones, William Ingham. And I think that's where, and then we get to the ones I previously said. So thank you very much for all those people. Total legends. Speak to you soon. Toodle pips.